Liberalism offered me an ethically responsible order of human progress without necessarily involving the state. It is quite remarkable how liberalism, an idea born in 18th century Europe, went on to become the reigning ideology of the world. For over 2 centuries, liberal democracies and free markets spread around the world to become the only sensible way to organize public life. Next thing I can tell you about is how I became a classical liberal. I worked for a company that made Vicks Vapor Rub. You've all, I'm sure, grown up as children with your mothers rubbing Vicks Vapor Rub when you were a baby. Anyway, one year there was a flu, and my company sold a lot of Vicks Vapor Rub. At the end of the year, we thought we had done a lot of good during an epidemic. We had helped millions of families in the country. But just as we were celebrating at the end of the year, I received a summons from the government which said that we had broken the law. And what was this law? It was a law of licensing, that we had sold more Vicks than was provided for in our license. We had sold 30% more. And so I was summoned to Delhi. My lawyers told me that there was a 2-year jail sentence associated with breaking this law. And so I was scared. And so I arrived in Delhi. The joint secretary kept me waiting for 2 hours. And then I was led into his office, and he was reading the newspaper, the Times of India of that day. And while we sat down, I was with a lawyer, and we waited for him to stop reading the paper. And after 5 minutes, he put the paper down and he looked at us and he said, "Kya?" And I said, "Saab, aap bataiye kya? Aapne hame bulaya hai." So he said, no, you tell me, what's the problem? And so I showed him the summons, and he said, "Oh, so you've broken the law." And I explained to him that there was a flu, and we did our duty. We kept the chemist shops stocked, the pharmacies stocked with our products, and I thought we had done good in the country and millions of people, especially children and families, were helped during this epidemic. And he answers, "But you broke the law." And I said, "Yes, but." He said, "No, but. You tell me yes or no." I said, "Yes." And then he said, "Well, I think he must have been a Marxist also, because he said, you chaps in the private sector are all crooks. And frankly, I want to make an example of our company, of your company. You multinational companies think you're above the law. You come to our country thinking we are a poor country and you can get away with whatever." And then he says, "Jao." And he threw us out of his office. And just as I was leaving this office, I turned around. I didn't know what got into me, but I said to him, "Sir, you realize that this news will come out, and we won't have to leak it. It's not every day that an executive of a multinational company goes to jail anywhere in the world. And since we are an American multinational, it'll appear in the New York Times in London Times, the Washington Post, and so on. And I said, when people read the report, what will they think about our country? What will they think that here was a company that was actually helping the people, and you sent the executive of that company to jail? And he said, "Are you threatening me?" I said, "No, I'm just telling you this is what will be." Acha, he said, "Jao." And so I walked out. And after I came out, the lawyer said to me, "My God, you should have fallen on his feet and begged for mercy. And look at you telling him that what will the country think? What will the world think of India?" Anyway, I had a lot of sleepless nights. But fortunately, the government, in its wisdom, dropped the case quietly. But the following week, I joined the Swatantra Party. I became a liberal. I'd been a socialist like everybody else at that time, and I went on to become a classical liberal. Now, there is a difference between liberals, and you probably know that as well as I do. One, classical liberal, basically, as I pointed out in the very beginning, is a person who believes in freedom and believes in freedom, both economic freedom, religious freedom, political freedom of all kinds. Now, but there's a difference between a left liberal and a liberal. You know, it, about the nine about the in the 1920s, soon when there was there were these progressives, and when uh, in the 1929 market crash, and there was a depression in the world, there was a very real concern about the future of capitalism and markets. And President Roosevelt stepped in, and they tried to save capitalism by creating jobs, because people were unemployed in a big way. Anyway, those people who came from the left and are and who still believe in markets, socialists, at least at that time, the communists particularly did not believe in the markets. But so the left liberals are different, and that I think you know. The libertarians also are a form of liberals, and they are at the other extreme, meaning they believe in a night watchman state, a chowkidar state, which means basically law and order is the role of the government. Now, a classical liberal, then of course there was neoliberals, and neoliberals came about after Hayek and so on, and they basically returned. The welfare state, by the way, continued after Roosevelt right up to the 1990s. But governments soon realized that they were bankrupt. They couldn't afford the sort of government spending on welfare, and the neoliberals came in at that time. Anyway, I don't want to. There's time. Time is short, so I just want to say that as a classical liberal in India today, I do believe in the role of the government beyond law and order. And I do believe that, for example, the government has a duty to ensure that there is education and health for everybody. It doesn't mean the government has to run schools and hospitals. It just means the government has to ensure, provide for it, create the incentive system for these things to come up. And I also believe in a safety net for the poorest. So that's defining who I am. But it's like a spectrum. And that's why the word liberal is a slippery word and needs defining each time. Now, I was asked to quickly speak to you about where we are today. and what needs to be done, and where is the liberalism today. So the story really begins in 1991, because before 1991, we did not. I mean, in 1947, we got our political liberty, but we got our economic liberty only 40 years later. And frankly, um, we sacrificed two generations of uh, people uh, in terms of job opportunities. That the we were a command economy, essentially, following the Soviet model. And Rajaji called this the license permit inspector Raj. Anyway, the economy, we got our economic freedom in 1991. And so what has happened after 1991? Well, in these uh, 30 years, India has grown at almost 6.5% a year, whereas in before 91 we had grown at 3.5% a year. We have lifted 450 million people out of poverty. Uh, the middle class has grown from 10% to 30%. Now, this is not as good as China. China lifted 600 million out of poverty, and its middle class has gone to 60%. But we have also created an IT revolution, and we are a player in the global economy in the IT world. So we, as a democracy, to grow at 6.5% is damn good, and we should be proud of that. But there is one big failing, and that is that we have not created enough jobs that should have been created with 6.5% growth. And why? Why? Because we have not created an industrial revolution. Manufacturing has let us down. Um, Half our people, 45% of Indians, are engaged in agriculture. And when agriculture needs only 1/3 of those people. So imagine that these are the people, half of those people, these are the people in China who became middle class. And so we have a real unfinished agenda for our country. And where we stand today is the need to get manufacturing going in the country. Manufacturing today employs less than 11% of the people, represents less than 15% of GDP. And the export of manufactured goods from India is 2% of world exports of manufacturing products. That's the significance of our failure. Now, how we do it is the big question. And frankly, I think it can be done. We are in a far better position today than in 1991. We have had a digital revolution. We have created one country through the GST, uh, and it's taken a lot of the friction out of the logistics in the country. Infrastructure is far better. Road mileage has doubled from 2011 to now. Port handling capacity has quadrupled. And the key thing today, today the best news is that iPhone production has shown the way. iPhones, India makes about 20% of the world's iPhones. China used to, 2 years ago, China produced 100%. China still produces 80%. And This is going to keep rising. And with the 15% last year that we did, 15% created 150,000 jobs in Chennai. And this was 70% of these jobs were women. And they came from villages, these women, to work. And frankly, each job created 4 indirect jobs. So 6 lakh jobs were created just through 15%. So now we're about 22%. And probably this is going to rise because of the tariffs game that Mr. Trump is playing in the world. And so what I would say is today, what needs to be done, first of all, and it's India's already real, I mean, the people in power have realized this. And today, Mr. Trump is our best friend because India's problem has been export pessimism. Right from Nehru's days, we have suffered from export pessimism. And even today, Trump calls us the tariff king of the world. Now, that's not a compliment. That's an insult. It shows that we are not connected with the global value chains, which produce most of the exports in the world. And and that if once we so Trump is forcing us to lower our tariffs. And what we could not do ourselves, he's going to force us to do. And this will make us more competitive, more open to investments like the kind that Apple has done. And today, what Apple has shown is that, when the Prime Minister of Vietnam heard that Vietnam, by the way, Vietnam produces all the cell phones of Samsung. And Vietnam is a far more hospitable country for foreign investors than India. We are basically a hostile country. We talk about wanting investment, but we are a hostile country. There's too much license raj still going on at the bottom, etc. So I'll talk about the other reforms we still need to do. But my point is, the Prime Minister of Vietnam goes to Cupertino, California. He takes a flight. That's where the headquarters of Apple is. He convinces the Apple CEO. He says, "We have lost the phone to India. Will you give us the tablet?" And he gets the tablet. This is the way to behave. This is how Tamil Nadu is behaving, and Tamil Nadu is getting the investment. And so, India, the chief minister of any state, with his delegation of people, should go to Nike, to Zara, to all the big consumer brands, which are labor intensive manufacturers, and convince the CEOs to manufacture in India. It can be done, and we will be competitive. We still need to do labor reform, we still need to do land acquisition reform, some other reforms. But this is the way to go. Anyway, so now this is one thing we need to do. As liberals, though, there's another problem. And I'm frankly convinced today, before I talk about the other problem, I'm convinced that our focus should be single-mindedly in other words, single-mindedly on getting 7 to 8% growth. If we're going to reach Viksit Bharat goal, we can't do it without achieving this. And if we do this, if we do a 6-7% growth for the next 25 years, majority of India will be middle class, like China. And then we can say we are a developed country. So economically, that's the job that needs to be done, but it has to be pursued. It should be our political objective. It should be our military objective. It should be our foreign policy objective. It should be our objective should be 7% economic growth for 25 years, keep opening the economy, keep getting the government out of the way, becoming an export competitive economy. Okay, so in addition to this, we still need to do governance reforms. Now, I wrote a book called India Grows at Night, and originally the title was India Grows at Night when the government sleeps. Now, I wasn't just selling, by the way, the publishers dropped the last part of it because they thought it was too insulting to the government. But anyway, the book talks about the need for governance reforms. Why should it take 15 years to get justice in our courts? Why should it take 15 years to settle a contract between two parties who are arguing? Um, so this we won't become a developed country unless we do these reforms. We have to do police reforms, judicial reforms, parliament reform. 1 out of 3 persons in parliament has got a has got a crime registered against him or her. So we can't have criminals in politics like that. And there's an answer for all these things. And the answers have been given in the various reports over the years. And, Margaret Thatcher used to say, Margaret Thatcher is famous for doing economic reform, but she actually reformed governance of England. That should be our motto. And also the reform of the bureaucracy. China changed the incentive system of its lower bureaucracy when Deng Xiaoping came to power and did the reforms. So the bureaucracy was measured on the investment that came, on the jobs that were created. That's how it was measured. Whereas in India, you get measured by how many people you refuse. You're a hero. I refused permission to this company. I mean, the attitude of the bureaucracy needs to be changed. Okay, and before I leave you, there's still one big problem, and that is that before 1991, India was, we thought we were regarded by the world as a real, true liberal democracy. Today, there's a danger of our becoming an illiberal democracy. And so there's a political issue. And this has been brought about by this present government, which has curbed dissent. And I have recounted the whole story in this book, The Dilemma of the Indian Liberal. And I would just say that we are worldwide with Mr. Trump and the other. The world is turning nationalistic, and we have to return back to the old liberal society. And the answer, I mean, I would not give up because I believe liberalism is too good an idea, and that's why it's been the reigning ideology of the world for 250 years. The world's not going to give up so easily. Yes, we are turning nationalistic, and the global economy is being forgotten, and there are reasons for it. But and in India particularly, I believe the temper of Indians is a liberal temper. When you have 330 million gods, no god can afford to feel jealous. That's the heart of our liberalism, our pluralism. And even in the Rig Veda, that famous Nasadiya verse in chapter 10, where they're talking about how was the cosmos created, how was the universe created. They're searching. And so one side says, well, maybe we should ask the gods. And the other person says, no, the gods came afterwards. how will they know? And then they say, let's ask the Brahmins. And no, they're always arguing with each other. We'll just get confused. And ultimately, they keep going back and forth, and they decide, well, maybe we don't know how the world was created. And that is a skeptical thought. And skepticism, inquiry, is at the root of the liberal temper of our country. And the liberal temper later went on to express itself in the Upanishads, in the searching and the questioning of the Upanishads. And so I believe, and that's why Amartya Sen wrote that wonderful book called The Argumentative Indian. We are an argumentative people, and that's the heart. So India is not going to cave in to becoming a dictatorship the way China did. In India, um, the state was never as powerful as society, and so, but that's another story. So that's my end of my little talk for you. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to to speak to you. And so maybe we'll meet one day soon. And let me wish you goodbye.